Daniel and his wife Olivia had been married for 7 years. They were both in their mid-30s, lived just outside of Denver, and had been struggling to reconnect after a rough patch. Between Daniel's demanding work as a financial advisor and Olivia's long hours as a nurse, their marriage had become strained, distant. Therapy hadn't worked, and the arguments had started getting louder, longer, and more personal. So when Olivia suggested a getaway to the quiet, sun-kissed shores of Santa Catalina Island off the California coast, Daniel jumped at the chance. "I just want us to breathe," she had said softly, her voice fragile. "Let's hit reset." They checked into the Avalon Breeze Resort, a quiet upscale retreat nestled between the cliffs and the sea. The resort was the kind of place where silence reigned. No kids, no parties, just adults sipping cocktails by the infinity pool or booking spa sessions in the Ocean View Wellness Center. It was picturesque and private, surrounded by winding garden paths and palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. Daniel hoped the trip would reignite something. The first 2 days were pleasant, if not passionate. They went kayaking, ate seafood by candlelight, and sat in the jacuzzi under the stars. Still, something in Olivia felt detached. She smiled, laughed, touched his arm occasionally, but never looked him in the eyes for long. She spent more time at the spa than with him. On the third day, things changed. That morning, Daniel had booked a private fishing charter, while Olivia opted for yet another massage session. She said she had back pain from sleeping on a hotel mattress. "Just an hour, maybe 90 minutes, she said, slipping on her robe and sandals. "Don't wait up." Daniel returned around 1 p.m., his arms full of fresh catch, excited to grill lunch for them both. But the suite was quiet, too quiet. The "Do Not Disturb" sign hung on the door, which seemed odd. They weren't supposed to get housekeeping today. He slid in his keycard anyway and walked in. What he saw stopped him cold. There, in the bed they had shared just the night before, was Olivia, naked, flushed, and wrapped in the arms of a muscular man he didn't recognize. The man was also nude, his hand tangled in her hair, lips inches from hers. For a moment, Daniel couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Olivia didn't see him at first, but the man did. His eyes widened in surprise as Daniel dropped the fishing cooler with a thud. Daniel!" Olivia screamed, pulling the sheet around her. "What the hell is this?" Daniel barked, his voice trembling between rage and disbelief. The man scrambled for his clothes. "I thought you said he was gone for the day." "Shut up," Olivia yelled, tears already forming. "Who is this?" Daniel growled, his hands clenched. The man paused and then muttered, "I'm her massage therapist." A silence followed that was so heavy it nearly knocked Daniel to his knees. Olivia tried to explain. It had started weeks ago, she said. The man's name was Marcos, a massage therapist she'd been seeing in Denver. She claimed the affair meant nothing, that it was a mistake, but the heat still lingered on her cheeks. Daniel saw it, and something in him shattered. He stormed out of the suite without another word. Later that evening, the hotel front desk received a noise complaint from the couple's room. Staff who checked in reported yelling, the sound of glass breaking, and a woman sobbing. The next morning, Olivia was found dead. Her body lay face down in the suite's infinity tub, the water stained pink with blood. The sheet that had once covered her was still on the bed, soaked with spilled wine. The police were called immediately. Daniel was nowhere to be found. But this was no simple case of a scorned husband losing control. Detective Valerie Ross, a seasoned homicide investigator with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, was flown in that afternoon. She'd handled messy love triangle cases before, but something about the scene smelled off. The evidence was too neat, the scene too staged, and the missing husband, either guilty or a patsy. As she walked through the resort suite, her eyes swept over every inch with clinical precision. Broken wine glass on the floor, a spa towel folded at the foot of the bed, a faint scent of eucalyptus oil, and the whisper of something darker beneath it all. Ross had learned one thing in her 18 years of detective work. People lie, but crime scenes don't. This case would unravel secrets no one expected. The massage therapist, the resort staff, even the resort itself, everyone had something to hide, and someone had murdered Olivia Black. Detective Ross lit a cigarette outside the balcony, the Pacific breeze cutting the edge of the crime's thick atmosphere. "Let's start digging," she muttered. Detective Valerie Ross had seen plenty of crime scenes in her career, murders that were hot-blooded, cold calculated, and everything in between. But something about room 407 at the Avalon Breeze Resort didn't sit right. It was too clean, too prepped. She stepped into the suite, latex gloves already on, and gave the room a slow, sweeping glance. Crime scene technicians moved quietly behind her, dusting, photographing, bagging. The soft hum of the Pacific breeze came through the cracked balcony door, but inside the air felt heavier, like it remembered what had happened. The tub was the first thing that drew her attention. Olivia Black lay face down, nude, her pale skin bloated and chilled. Her dark brown hair floated around her like seaweed. Water mixed with blood swirled gently around her lifeless form. Ross knelt beside the tub, careful not to disturb the waterline. "No defensive wounds," the coroner murmured beside her. "No signs of blunt force trauma. Single incision along the inside of the right thigh. Clean cut. She would have bled out in minutes." "Accidental fall?" Ross asked. He shook his head. "Too precise. This was deliberate." Ross nodded. There was no broken glass in the bathroom, no slippery mats. Whoever did this knew what they were doing and wanted it to look subtle, intimate, almost graceful. She stood and moved back into the bedroom. The wine glass on the floor had shattered. A crimson stain ran down the side of the bed to the beige carpet. A second glass, untouched, sat on the nightstand. Fingerprints were already being lifted from both. She noted the wine bottle was still mostly full. If there had been an argument, it hadn't been over drinks. The bed itself was unmade but not violently disturbed. Someone had sat there. Someone had waited. Her eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, the little details. The folded towel with the spa logo was too perfectly placed. A second towel lay damp on the floor. A used condom was found in the bathroom trash, wrapped in tissue. A receipt for a 2 p.m. spa session, Olivia's name printed clearly, was found on the nightstand. And a small vial of eucalyptus massage oil was perched near the bathtub, the cap off. Detective Ross, a uniformed officer, called from the doorway. "We pulled the security cam feeds from the hallway." She followed him down to the resort security room, where a technician replayed footage from the third day of Olivia and Daniel's stay. At 1:05 p.m., Daniel Black entered the suite, fishing cooler in hand. He didn't leave again until 1:13, visibly shaken, stumbling. At 1:17, Marcos Rivera, the massage therapist, was seen leaving the room, shirtless, clutching his clothes, his eyes wide, his face red. Then nothing. No one entered the room again until 8:02 p.m., when a guest in the next suite called about loud voices. Staff knocked, got no answer, and called hotel security, and that's when the body was found. "No Daniel after that?" Ross asked. "Nothing. He's gone," the tech confirmed. "Left no trace." She returned to the suite just as a crime scene technician held up a bagged piece of evidence, a torn page from a notepad. "Found this in the trash. Might have been a note or letter. Ink's smudged from water damage, but we'll try to recover what we can." Ross squinted at the smeared text. Only a few words were legible. "I can't do this anymore," and "always watching." She filed that away and moved back to the bedroom. On the dresser was Daniel's phone. Locked. They'd send it to tech forensics. Olivia's phone, however, was missing. "Unusual for a woman not to have her phone on her," Ross said. "Think the killer took it?" the tech asked. "Maybe," she muttered. "Or maybe she wasn't planning on being found." She walked out onto the balcony. The ocean was calm, the sun halfway below the horizon. Couples clinked glasses at patio tables below, unaware that a murder investigation was unraveling above them. Ross took a breath, then walked back inside. Her notepad already had a list of suspects and unknowns. Why was Olivia killed in such a quiet, calculated way? Was Daniel truly enraged, or was he being set up? Where is Olivia's phone? And what happened between 1:17 p.m. and 8 p.m.? Ross stared at the notepad and circled one word. Framed? "Get me Rivera," she said. Now, she knew he'd run. People who panic always do. But if he was hiding something about Olivia, about Daniel, or about what really happened that day, Ross would dig it out. No one runs from the truth forever. Marcos Rivera didn't make it far. Detective Valerie Ross had a team combing through the ferry logs and security footage from every transport line leaving Santa Catalina Island. Less than 24 hours after Olivia Black was found dead, Marcos was picked up at the Long Beach terminal, alone, anxious, and trying to hail a rideshare. He didn't resist arrest. In fact, he seemed relieved when Ross and her team cornered him. Back in the mainland precinct, Ross sat across from him in interview room 4. It was a windowless chamber with off-white walls, a ticking clock, and a thick smell of old carpet. Marcos fidgeted in the metal chair, his hoodie zipped to the neck, ball cap pulled low over his face. He looked nothing like the confident, physically imposing massage therapist seen in the security footage. Now he looked small, cornered. Ross opened her file and spoke in a calm, measured voice. Name: Marcos David Rivera, age 32, employed at Tranquility Spa in Denver, licensed massage therapist. No priors, no complaints, no outstanding warrants. That's all good. She slid a photo across the table. Olivia's body in the tub. But this isn't good, Marcos. He didn't look at the photo. His jaw clenched, and he stared at the table. I didn't kill her, he said quickly. No? Then tell me what you did do. He sighed, then began, voice cracking under the weight of it all. She was a client, regular. Started coming to the spa last fall. Bad posture, tension in her back. We talked a lot during her sessions. About her marriage mostly. Said her husband was distant, controlling, emotionally unavailable. One day she stayed late, asked for a longer session. One thing led to another. Ross raised an eyebrow. You started sleeping with her? Yes, only a few times. Then she said she wanted it to stop, that it was a mistake. But when she booked the vacation with her husband, she messaged me, said she wanted to see me. Just one last time. So you flew to Santa Catalina Island for a last time? He nodded. She paid for the ferry, got me a room under a different name, said she had one free afternoon while her husband was out fishing. That was the plan. Just meet, talk, say goodbye. Is that what you did? His eyes flicked to Ross's. Yes, we were in bed when her husband walked in. He lost it, threw the cooler, started screaming. I thought he was going to hit her, or me. I grabbed my clothes and left. I swear that was the last I saw of her. Ross leaned forward, voice lowering. You left and she ended up dead in a bathtub. You didn't think to call the police? I panicked. I knew how it would look. Her husband sees us together. She ends up dead hours later. Who else would they blame? I just wanted to go back home and disappear. You cleaned up before you left. He blinked. What? You took your towel, flushed the condom. There was no spa record of you being there. Almost like you planned to vanish. Marcos shook his head. Number I wiped nothing. She told me hotel staff doesn't keep records for unofficial guests. I didn't even stay in the suite. I had my own room. Ross flipped a page. Your room was paid for with a prepaid debit card bought at a Denver gas station. Know how we found that out? The clerk remembered your tattoo. She tapped a photo showing a serpent inked around Marcos's wrist. So don't tell me this wasn't planned. He broke then, palms against his face, voice cracking again. Okay, I didn't plan to hurt her, but I knew it was wrong. She said she felt watched, like her husband knew something. She was scared. Ross sat back. That word again. Watched. What do you mean, watched? She told me Daniel had a temper, that he would go quiet and cold when he suspected things. Said once he followed her after work. Never confronted her, just started showing up randomly, checking her phone, her messages. She thought he might have bugged her car. Why didn't she leave? She said she felt guilty, that he wasn't always like that. But lately something had shifted. She told me 2 days before the trip that if he found out, he'd never forgive her. And I quote, he'll ruin me before he lets me go. Ross wrote it all down. A more complex image of Daniel Black was forming. Cold, suspicious, emotionally detached, maybe even dangerous. "Tell me what you saw in that room," Ross pressed. "I saw Olivia, pale, shaking. She wasn't even angry he caught us. She looked afraid. She told me to go, that she'd handle it. I wanted to stay to explain, but I left. I swear I didn't hurt her." Ross studied his face for signs of deceit. His pupils dilated, his breathing steady. But it didn't mean he was innocent. "You're free to go for now," she said. "But stay local, and if you run again, I'll make sure you never practice in this country again." Marcos nodded, stunned. Back at her desk, Ross reviewed the digital forensics on Olivia's missing phone. Turns out it pinged one last time the afternoon of the murder, near the cliffs behind the resort, a trail popular with hikers and a convenient place to toss something you didn't want found. "Get me a search team," Ross ordered, "and pull any drone footage from that day." She also had tech working on recovering the note from the trash. Something about it still itched in her mind. As she closed the file on Marcos for the night, one question burned brighter than the rest. If Daniel wasn't the killer, why had he disappeared? And if he was, where had he taken her phone? And what had he done in those critical hours? Detective Valerie Ross didn't sleep much that night. Cases like these dug under her skin. They whispered while she drank coffee, lurked at the back of her thoughts even during her drive home along the empty LA freeway. But the Olivia Black case wasn't just any murder. It was too neat, too calculated. It felt like someone had choreographed it. And the man at the center of it, Daniel Black, was gone. Officially, Daniel was now a missing person and a person of interest in his wife's murder. The moment Olivia's body was discovered and Daniel wasn't answering his phone, the resort staff had alerted authorities. His ID, credit cards, and phone were found in the room. But there was no sign of his physical presence after 1:13 p.m. on the day of the murder. Ross started the next morning in the small command post they'd set up at the Avalon Breeze. A corkboard was filled with timelines, photos, and maps. A red thread linked Daniel's last known location to the hiking trail that led up into the cliffs behind the resort and down to the ocean. "Could he have jumped?" asked Officer Garcia, one of her deputies. "Possibly," Ross said. "But no body's been found, and jumpers usually leave something. Shoes, a wallet, a goodbye note. Daniel left nothing but silence. She ordered the drone footage from the trail reviewed in high resolution. Meanwhile, a K-9 unit was sent along the bluff trail. Within hours, they found something. Evidence item 014, olive green windbreaker, size L, torn at sleeve. Confirmed to match Daniel Black's resort registration photo. It was caught on a tree branch halfway down a slope leading toward a small sea cave. But no prints, no blood, no sign of Daniel. Ross stood at the edge of the cliff trail that afternoon, the Pacific waves crashing far below. Her gut said he was still alive. He'd vanished with purpose, not despair. She had her team look at ferry logs, flight records, bus manifests, any movement off the island. Most required ID, and Daniel's identification had been left behind. But when she pulled surveillance from a small private marina on the west side of the island, she got a hit. April 10th, 6:42 p.m. A man, face hidden under a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, boarded a fishing boat owned by one Tucker Brannigan, a local who ran occasional charters for deep-sea anglers and tourists. Tucker's boat, the Pelican Drift, had left the marina at 6:50 p.m., just hours before Olivia's body was discovered. Ross tracked Tucker down. He was sunburnt, wiry, and smelled of old beer and salt water. He claimed to not know Daniel. "I had a guy pay cash," he said, "wanted to be dropped off on the mainland, said his girlfriend was mad and he didn't want a scene, told me to keep my mouth shut and gave me a $500 tip." Ross showed him Daniel's photo. Tucker scratched his chin, squinting. "Yeah, that's the guy. You looking for him?" "Hard," Ross said. With Tucker's help, she confirmed that Daniel had reached the mainland late that night, slipping through the cracks, vanishing like smoke. No credit card activity, no phone ping, no social media. But that was just the beginning. Back at headquarters, forensics had more news. They'd recovered the text from the crumpled note in Olivia's suite. After digital enhancement, it read, "Daniel, I can't keep living like this. I know you know. And I know you've been watching, but you won't trap me here forever. This trip isn't for us. It's for me to decide if I can forgive you. If I can't, then I'm leaving. And you can't stop me. Olivia Ross stared at the words. They told a different story than the one Daniel and Olivia presented to the world. This wasn't a rekindling vacation. This was an ultimatum. Olivia wanted out. She called Olivia's sister, Claire Morgan, who lived in Boulder. She told me she was afraid of him, Claire said, her voice shaking. Daniel wasn't violent, not physically, but he was possessive, quietly threatening. The kind of man who would make you feel crazy for wanting space. I told her to leave. I think she was planning to. Ross asked if Olivia ever mentioned being followed. Yes, Claire replied. She thought Daniel had planted something in her car. Once she found a strange Bluetooth device under the passenger seat. He denied it, but Olivia stopped trusting him after that. Ross had a team sweep Olivia's car, still parked in long term at Denver International Airport. They found it, a GPS tracker, small, disguised as part of the car's OBD2 port, registered to a fake company, but the purchase was traceable. It led right back to an Amazon account in Daniel's name. Ross's timeline was getting sharper. April 10th, 1:13 p.m. Daniel discovers the affair. 1:17 p.m. Marcos flees the suite. 3 to 6 p.m. Estimated time of Olivia's death. 6:50 p.m. Daniel sneaks off island via private boat. By April 11th. Daniel disappears on the mainland, but the final detail came from digital forensics on Daniel's laptop, retrieved from the hotel room. One folder, deeply hidden, was labeled Trust Her. Inside were screenshots, hundreds of them, from Olivia's text messages, emails, and social media. Private conversations with her sister, photos of her and Marcos outside the spa in Denver. One document listed all of Olivia's passwords and recent logins. It was surveillance, emotional, psychological control. He had been watching her for months. Now Ross had motive, jealousy, obsession, betrayal, and premeditation. Ross exhaled slowly, pen tapping the edge of the case file. Daniel Black didn't snap, she murmured. He planned this. Daniel Black had disappeared like a ghost. No credit card activity, no social media pings, no bank withdrawals. He had scrubbed his digital presence clean, just like someone who had planned to vanish. Detective Valerie Ross stared at the evidence board as the late evening sun cast long shadows across the precinct's conference room. Daniel's face stared back at her from his DMV photo. Clean-cut, distant eyes, a tight-lipped smile that never reached them. He had left clues, not obvious ones, but ones she could see now, with the full picture. The tracker in Olivia's car, the surveillance folder on his laptop, the cold silence from co-workers and friends who all said the same thing. He was hard to read, didn't really open up. Ross had enough circumstantial evidence to strongly suggest Daniel killed his wife, but suspicion and motive weren't enough to lock him up. Not yet. She needed proof, a confession, or a trap. She opted for the trap. April 14th at 7:48 a.m., Ross sat in her office with a mug of black coffee, scrolling through a burner Instagram account she had just created. The profile was subtle. Fake spa photos, a made-up name, a bio that read, Denver-based therapist, healing through touch. She added a few photos of a woman resembling Olivia from a distance. Then she crafted the post carefully. Some ghosts come back to finish what they started, but I'm not afraid anymore. Catalina was the end, or was it? She tagged the location. Santa Catalina Island. The account's first follower appeared within hours. An anonymous profile with no picture, no bio, no followers. But the IP pinged from somewhere in inland California. Ross flagged it immediately. By mid-afternoon, that same account viewed every post on the profile, twice. Then it sent a DM. You shouldn't be playing with things you don't understand. Ross smiled. She had him. April 15th at 10:20 a.m. She worked with cybercrime to geolocate the device tied to the account, a small internet cafe in Bakersfield. Not a place for tourists, too off-grid. A surveillance camera inside the cafe showed a man in a hoodie, seated near the back, using the terminal for less than 10 minutes. Ross froze the frame. Even with the hood up, the profile was unmistakable. The jawline, the posture, Daniel Black. He was alive and watching. Ross didn't move to arrest him right away. She needed to know what he was after. Why message the fake account? Was it fear? Rage? Did he believe Olivia was still alive? Or was he checking to see if anyone had uncovered what really happened? She built the next move carefully. Using the fake profile, she posted again. The past never stays buried. Some secrets follow you home, especially the ones you try hardest to kill. 3 hours later, the anonymous account responded, "You're lying. She's dead." The slip-up was subtle but huge. He'd admitted it, in his own words. Ross requested a subpoena to trace the user behind the burner profile. It came back registered to a burner phone purchased in Los Angeles on April 11th, the day after Olivia's murder. Store surveillance confirmed Daniel was the buyer. Now she had him, but she still needed the full story. April 16th at 6 a.m., Ross flew out to Bakersfield with a small task force. They located Daniel's temporary apartment, an Airbnb rented, under a fake name, paid for in cash. She waited outside the modest building in an unmarked SUV. At 6:42 a.m., Daniel exited the unit wearing a baseball cap, sunglasses, and a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. Ross stepped out of the car slowly. Daniel Black. He froze. He didn't run. Instead, he turned to face her, calm and silent. "You're under arrest for the murder of your wife, Olivia Black." He said nothing as she read him his rights. No protest, no emotion. At the station during interrogation, Ross played the messages from the fake profile. Then she laid out every piece of the puzzle. His surveillance of Olivia, the GPS tracker, the bugged emails, the missing phone, the timeline of his escape, the stage scene. She watched him crack, not with a scream but with a whisper. "She was going to leave me." "And you couldn't handle that," Ross replied. "I gave her everything. I forgave her. I was going to let her be happy, but then I saw them together, in our bed, laughing." He looked up, and there was finally something in his eyes. Not regret, not guilt, just fury, still burning. "I didn't mean to kill her. I just wanted her to listen. She wouldn't. She said she hated me, that she wished I'd disappear." I snapped. He buried his face in his hands. "She hit her head. She started bleeding. I panicked. I put her in the tub, thought maybe it would look like a slip. I didn't want her found like that." Ross let the silence hang. "You cleaned it up. You ran." He looked up. "I knew no one would believe me. You made sure of that. The confession was recorded, the evidence airtight. It wasn't a clean case of murder by planning, but it was manslaughter at the very least. And everything Daniel did after proved his consciousness of guilt. He would go to trial, likely serve decades. But Ross knew this wasn't just a murder. It was a slow-motion collapse, a relationship that had died long before the body was found. Victim, Olivia Black, 35. Cause of death, exsanguination from leg wound, secondary to blunt trauma. Time of death, estimated between 3:30 to 5:30 p.m., April 10th. Primary suspect, Daniel Black, husband, apprehended April 16th. Motive, jealousy, betrayal, emotional breakdown following confrontation. Charges filed, second-degree murder, evidence tampering, flight from prosecution. Ross closed the case file late that evening and stood at her window, watching the California sky fade to violet. Even after all the years, all the stories, every murder had a heartbeat behind it. Some just beat louder than others before they stopped. The trial for Daniel Black began in the fall of 2025. By then, the story of Olivia's murder had gripped the public. Newspapers, podcasts, and viral social media feeds had all dissected the case. It was a quiet, domestic tragedy that exploded into something bigger, a tale of obsession, deception, and a marriage slowly decaying under its own weight. Detective Valerie Ross stood at the back of the courtroom, watching Daniel Black, his face now tired and haggard, sit at the defense table. His once neatly pressed shirts were now loose, his posture slumped. He wasn't the confident, composed man Ross had seen in the photos from Olivia's case. Now he was just another defendant, lost under the weight of his own lies. The defense was doing everything it could to paint the picture of a man pushed to the edge. They wanted the jury to believe that Daniel Black had snapped in a moment of rage, an impulsive outburst after discovering his wife's infidelity. They pointed to his sudden disappearance, to the lack of a clear motive, and they tried to frame it as a tragic accident. But Ross knew better. She had been there from the beginning. She had the pictures, the forensics, the timeline, and the confession. And while the evidence was damning, it wasn't enough for some. The defense wanted to muddy the waters. They painted a different version of events, a story of a man wronged and a wife who pushed him too far. Let's get this straight, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense attorney Richard Claiborne said in his smooth, calm voice. Daniel Black was blindsided. He walked into his vacation suite, a place where he was supposed to reconnect with his wife, only to find her in bed with another man. This was not a premeditated murder. This was a husband, devastated and heartbroken, who acted in a moment of uncontrollable rage. Claiborne made a deliberate pause, letting the words hang in the air. Now, I'm not excusing his actions, but what I am asking you to consider is this. Was it murder, or was it a tragic accident? A crime of passion? Ross sat stone-faced, watching the jury. She could see the cracks forming in the defense's arguments, the subtle hints of doubt being planted. The problem with a crime of passion defense was that it required emotion, spontaneity. But Daniel hadn't acted impulsively. He'd been careful, meticulous. Every step he took had been calculated. The GPS tracker, the burner phone, the use of the private boat, all of it pointed to a man who had planned his actions, even if only in the immediate aftermath of his discovery. As the trial continued, Ross began to uncover a deeper layer to Daniel Black's manipulation. She'd spent countless hours combing through Olivia's personal history, her journals, her messages to friends, her texts to Daniel. What she discovered wasn't just a woman caught in an unhealthy marriage, but a woman who had been gaslighted for years. September 22nd, 2025. Courtroom, day 7 of the trial. The morning began with testimony from Olivia's best friend, Claire Morgan. Claire had always been a vital part of the case. Her insight into Olivia's state of mind, her words about Daniel's controlling nature, had painted a disturbing picture. Now Claire was sitting on the stand, her voice wavering slightly but strong in her conviction. Olivia was scared, Claire said, her eyes locked on the defense attorney. She didn't think Daniel would hurt her, not in a violent way, but he was possessive. He couldn't stand the idea of her having a life outside of him. She didn't even feel safe in her own home. It wasn't just the affair, it was everything that led up to it. She was suffocating. Ross leaned forward, watching Daniel closely. He didn't flinch, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He was trying to control his reaction, to hold his emotions back. But Ross knew. She knew this wasn't just about an affair. This was about a man who couldn't bear to lose control. Later in the trial, it was Olivia's therapist who would take the stand, offering a chilling look into the last days of Olivia's life. The sessions had been confidential, but Olivia had made one thing clear. She had planned to leave, to finally walk away from a marriage that had been built on emotional manipulation. September 24th, 2025, the closing arguments. The trial had lasted over 2 weeks with moments of tension, emotion, and overwhelming silence. Now it was time for the closing arguments. Ross sat in her seat, her gaze fixed on the jury. The judge had instructed them to carefully consider the evidence, the timeline of events, the forensics, the digital traces Daniel had left behind. But the defense was still pushing for a manslaughter charge, trying to convince the jury that Daniel had acted in the heat of the moment. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecutor began, her voice firm and steady. What you've heard from the defense is an attempt to excuse the actions of a man who killed his wife, not out of rage but out of fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being exposed, fear of being left. But there's one thing the defense hasn't shown you, one thing they can't explain. She turned to Daniel, her gaze unwavering. There is no remorse, no apology, just silence. Ross had seen that silence too. The coldness in Daniel's eyes when he was confronted. The refusal to admit anything more than what he thought would save him. The jury didn't need to hear more. They had already seen it. The prosecutor continued. Daniel Black didn't just kill his wife in a moment of passion. He planned her murder, manipulated the situation, and fled to avoid the consequences. This was not a crime of rage. It was a crime of control. October 2nd, 2025, the verdict. The jury deliberated for just under 24 hours. When the courtroom reconvened, Ross felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. She watched Daniel closely, wondering if he was prepared for what was coming. The judge called for silence as the jury returned. The foreman stood and cleared his throat. We, the jury, find the defendant, Daniel Black, guilty of second-degree murder. A quiet gasp rippled through the courtroom. Daniel's face went pale, and for a split second, it almost seemed like he was going to break down. But he didn't. He stood still, his posture rigid, as if he could will the world to stop turning. As the verdict was read, Ross allowed herself a small breath. Justice had been served, but at a cost. There would be no more answers from Daniel Black. No more insights into the twisted dynamics of his marriage. But Olivia's story, Olivia's voice, had been heard, and for that, Ross could find peace. Daniel Black was sentenced to 30 years to life for the second-degree murder of his wife, Olivia Black. Throughout the trial, the defense never fully acknowledged the cold, calculated nature of his actions. Despite his attempts to play the victim, Daniel's premeditation was clear. Olivia's death marked the end of a long cycle of control, manipulation, and betrayal. Her family, especially her sister Claire, vowed to advocate for those trapped in emotionally abusive relationships. Detective Valerie Ross, having closed yet another difficult case, reflected on the complexities of human behavior. She would never understand what drove Daniel to murder his wife. But at least now, Olivia had justice. And that was enough for Ross. For now. The courtroom was silent, but the world outside was anything but. News outlets had descended on the trial like vultures, dissecting every aspect of the case. Olivia Black's tragic death had become the kind of story that people couldn't look away from. Sensational, heart-wrenching, and horrifying all at once. Headlines screamed about the perfect marriage turned deadly and the chilling premeditation behind the crime. Daniel Black, once a wealthy businessman, was now a convicted murderer, and his fall from grace was splashed across every media outlet. Detective Valerie Ross hadn't asked for the attention. In fact, she had long since grown used to the quiet hum of her work, far from the public spotlight. But now the case had reached its peak. The news cycle churned, the public demanded answers, and Olivia's family was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had been stolen from them. October 12th, 2025, Ross's office. Ross sat at her desk, staring at the cold, empty space of her computer screen. The trial was over. Daniel Black was behind bars, the case was closed, and yet she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something left unresolved. It was as if the threads of the story were still tangled, waiting for someone to untangle them. She'd spoken to Olivia's family countless times throughout the investigation and the trial. Claire, Olivia's sister, had been strong throughout it all. Grieving, yes, but always composed. Olivia's parents, however, had struggled with the loss. They were heartbroken, devastated by the betrayal of their daughter's final months. Ross had never allowed herself to get emotionally involved in her cases. She couldn't afford to. But there was something about this one that gnawed at her. Olivia had been so young, so full of potential. Her life had been taken not by some random act of violence, but by someone who had vowed to love and protect her. Ross could feel the weight of the woman Olivia had once been, the woman she could have become, hanging in the air. The door to her office creaked open, and Ross looked up. It was Garcia, her deputy. "Got something for you," he said, holding out a folder. "You'll want to see this." Ross took the file. Her curiosity piqued. She opened it and found a series of new documents, emails, records, and photos, some that hadn't been part of the original investigation. "What's this?" she asked. "Some follow-up work." After the trial wrapped up, we started looking into Daniel's business dealings. Thought there might be something we missed. Ross raised an eyebrow. What did you find? Garcia slid a few photos from the folder, showing documents that outlined a series of financial transactions. Daniel wasn't just keeping tabs on Olivia. He had money problems, big ones, several investments that went under, debts mounting faster than he could handle. He was scrambling to hide it. Ross's heart sank. She had known Daniel had a dark side, his controlling nature, his manipulative behavior, but she hadn't realized how deep the rot ran. This wasn't just about his marriage. It was about survival. He had been playing a dangerous game, trying to keep up the facade of a successful businessman while falling deeper into financial ruin. That explains the surveillance, Ross muttered, her mind racing. He wasn't just trying to control her. He was afraid she would leave him, not just emotionally, but financially too. Garcia nodded. Exactly. Turns out Olivia had been on the verge of divorcing him, and if she had, her share of the assets would have included the house, the investments, and most of the savings. Daniel would have been left with almost nothing. This murder, it wasn't just about jealousy, it was about desperation. Ross stood up from her desk, walking toward the window. The city sprawled below her, and for a moment she let herself breathe. It wasn't just the emotional manipulation or the affair that had caused Olivia's death. It was the cold, calculated pressure Daniel had put on her to keep up appearances, to maintain a life that was unraveling at the seems October 14th, 2025. Claire Morgan's house. Later that week, Ross paid another visit to Claire. Olivia's sister had been a pillar of strength throughout the entire trial, but now with the verdict in, the house seemed quieter, the grief more palpable. It was hard to imagine a future without Olivia, even with justice served. Claire greeted her at the door, her face drawn, but still hopeful. Valerie, thank you for coming. I know it's been a lot. I wanted to check in, Ross said, stepping inside. I know the trial is over, but I still don't feel like everything's been put to rest. Claire nodded. I get that. It's hard to move on, especially knowing that Daniel did this. I still can't wrap my head around it. I keep thinking, I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have known. Ross shook her head. You couldn't have known. Daniel was good at hiding his true nature. He controlled everything, the way he acted, the way he presented himself. He was a master manipulator. There was a long silence between them. Claire finally spoke again, her voice softer this time. It's hard to believe she's gone. I don't think I'll ever really understand how someone who said he loved her could do something like that. It feels like she was living a life I didn't know about. Ross hesitated before answering. You did everything you could. You were there for her. Olivia. She didn't die because of anything you did or didn't do. She died because Daniel was willing to do anything to keep her in his control. But in the end, you and your family gave her the one thing she couldn't get from him. Freedom. Claire blinked back tears, but she nodded, her resolve steadying. I hope so. I just wish she'd had more time. I wish that too, Ross said quietly. November 2025, the final report. The case was officially closed and Daniel Black was serving his sentence at a maximum security prison in California. His trial had been a public spectacle, but now with the conclusion of the legal proceedings, the world had mostly moved on. The media had found a new story to latch on to, and the Black family's tragedy faded into the background. But not for Valerie Ross. She couldn't forget the quiet finality that had come with Olivia's death, or the gnawing sense of something left undone. There were still the ripples to deal with, the people left behind to pick up the pieces. Ross hadn't been able to save Olivia, but she had brought Daniel to justice. That was something. Maybe not enough, but it was something. As the year came to a close, Ross sat in her office finishing her final case report. She closed the file on Olivia Black's murder and placed it in the drawer. Then she turned off the lights and left the office, stepping out into the cool evening air. Some cases haunted her longer than others. And this one would stay with her. But for now at least, there was peace. Olivia's story had been told. Her death hadn't been in vain, and that was enough.